Awesome. So again, we have Danielle Golub on the call. Danielle, are you PGY4 this year?
5.
PGY5. So this website is out of date. Danielle
It
is
just changed.
so she's postgraduate year 5. And she received, I have to pull this up. I had it. Yes. So she received her Bachelor of Arts in Cognitive Neuroscience with a minor in Chemistry and Healthcare Management from the University of Pennsylvania before
We really have
attending.
all the info.
Yes. Thank God for LinkedIn. And she also studied, she received her medical degree and doctor in medicine at NYU Grossman School of Medicine, as well as a master's of science and clinical and transitional research from NYU Grossman before starting her residency. And then we also have Dr. Justin Turpin, who is, I guess you need PGY6, yes?
Yes.
Yes. So Dr. Turpin is a PGY6. He received his Bachelor of Science in psychology with a minor in biology and a concentration in neuroscience from the University of Richmond before attending medical school at the University of Pennsylvania, where he studied biochemistry and molecular biology, immunology, microbiology, histology, and developmental biology. Danielle is interested in neuro-oncology and skull-based neurosurgery. And Justin has been interested and focused in vascular neurosurgery. So they are going to be able to give you kind of a wide scope of the different subspecialties you can pursue. Also, I think it'd be really interesting to share how you guys kind of found your clinical interests throughout your medical and residency journeys. Welcome, Danielle and Justin.
Thank you. I think Justin should go first because I think he has to go back to the operating room. So I want to make sure he gets to tell his life story. Oh, you're muted, Justin.
Just, yeah, sorry guys, I'm going to be kind of in and out in between cases. Right now, I'm actually at MRI watching a HIFU case, Danielle. It's their 50th high frequency focused ultrasound
Oh, that's
case.
a big deal.
It's pretty cool.
Do you get like an award for just being there now? Or can you log multiple
I think I'm
cases
going to
now because you
be
were there?
all on the social media video posts.
Oh, that's so cool.
Anyway, so yeah, I'm going to be kind of in and out. I'm waiting for a case to start. So am I just talking a little bit about my background, I guess, although Hannah did a really good job.
Oh,
Yeah,
thank
journey
you.
to residency. Let's hear
Yeah,
about
so
it.
yeah, you can just share how you decided to pursue this career path and how you
Okay.
chose neurosurgery and then eventually kind of found your way in vascular surgery.
Sure. So I'm from mostly New Jersey. My family is half Japanese, and my Japanese side of the family runs a little hospital in southern Japan. It's like a rural area where everyone knows everyone. My family has like runs the clinic there. So I would actually, when I visited my family, I would spend most or a lot of the days in the hospital, like running around and like playing on the hospital grounds. And then from early on, I thought it would be pretty cool to be a doctor. But the interest in neuroscience started in college. I took this class called Neural Communications, and I was just amazed with how cool it is that everything we feel, think, and do and enjoy and relationships and love, it all comes from the brain, which amazed me. And I loved learning about it because it was also such a mystery. And after that first year of college, I went home and went to the local neurosurgery office like near my house. And I just asked if I could shadow for the summer. And that guy was named Dr. Moore. He was this local neurosurgeon who did kind of general neurosurgery, partly at Mount Sinai, but also partly at the local hospital in New Jersey. And he said, to my surprise, I actually like went to the front desk with an envelope asking if I could work there. And he called me on my way home and said, just come Monday. And I ended up spending 3 months there hanging out with him and his staff. And I just got to see him kind of have discussions with his patients and have the patients come in before surgery and they talk about how they can't walk because of their back pain or whatever struggles they're going through because of the brain tumor they have. And then I got to see the surgery, and then post-operatively, they would come back so appreciative and with their lives changed for the better in most cases. And that experience made me want to do neurosurgery. And then I basically just had to work hard throughout college after that because I was like, oh my gosh, it's hard to do neurosurgery. So I had to really step it up with academics. But it worked out. And what I ended up doing was that post-bac program helped me get better grades and get more classes under the belt. And then I did a year at Mount Sinai studying neuroscience, like cognitive neuroscience. And then vascular came into the picture mostly during residency. I think it's been a combination of things, but I definitely very I like fast-paced, high-intensity types of activities, and vascular is definitely that. And I've had some really strong mentors that have gotten me very passionate about it, and so that's how I've chosen my path. I think that's about everything I can think of to say for my background and story.
That's helpful. Thanks, Justin.
Want
Thanks
to
for
go,
coming
Danielle?
also. Sure.
Yeah,
Um,
of course.
I'm Danielle. I grew up in New York City. My uncle was actually a big influence in my life growing up. My mom's brother, who's really my best friend. My mom and my uncle were like 12 or 15 years apart. They're like there's 7 kids in between them. So my uncle is much younger compared to my mom. So he was like the cool uncle. And her family is all from Lebanon. So when they came here, my mom came first. She's in business. She's in finance, and she brought her brother over. My uncle had started orthopedic surgery residency in France after doing medical school in Lebanon. Most people in Lebanon end up training in France or Europe. Most doctors. And when he came to the States, he had to basically redo residency because that's what ends up happening when you come from out of the country, which I'm sure a lot of the students watching are probably out of the country too. It was just like that back in the 80s. So when my uncle came, my mom helped him and navigate the system, and he managed to get to do internal medicine residency at Montefiore. And then he did his pulmonary critical care fellowship at Bellevue, and then actually got an attending position at Lenox Hill in the MICU. And so growing up with my uncle being an attending in the MICU at Lenox was kind of how I learned about medicine, because everyone else in my immediate family was in finance or went into finance. My younger brother went into finance. So my uncle was a really big influence for me, and I really enjoyed hearing all about his critical care stories. So I definitely knew I wanted to do medicine, and I definitely wanted to do something high acuity. And then of course, still it's crazy to admit this, but working for my uncle at Lenox, I did actually end up meeting Dr. Bookvar and Dr. Langer when I was a high school student. Dr. Bookvar had just gone there and Langer was there a little bit before that. So I met them when I was in high school. I did a little bit of shadowing then too. I think I was like the first brain turn ever. I also shadowed Ted Schwartz at Cornell, whose brother, just so you guys get an idea, a lot of this is like not connections per se, but like utilizing opportunities that are nearby. Dr. Schwartz, who's a big pituitary and skull base and brain tumor surgeon at Cornell, his brother was my dad's finance company's lawyer. So we sort of met, I met him through that. And he also had a student shadowing program at the time. And I did his student shadowing program for over a year. And I happened to go to a private school where this sort of spring semester of your senior year, like there is no more school, like you took your finals in the winter and then you had to do like a senior project. So I just basically worked for him full time before going to college. And then I kind of knew from my experiences with all of them that neurosurgery was definitely interesting, and I definitely wanted to study neuroscience in college. And I did a lot of lab work in college, which sort of solidified my interest in neurobiology. And then I went straight from college to medical school, which I know isn't the most popular route anymore. And back then was sort of when I applied to medical school was 2015, 2014, 2015. And back then was when this transition was sort of starting for medical schools to favor non-traditional students, meaning students that aren't coming right out of college. So definitely it was actually a tough application process for me. And medical schools, just like residencies do when they're looking at applications, they really look to see where people lived, where people are from, because they want to get a sense where people really want to be in the end. So I ended up really only getting interviews at medical schools in New York because I was close by for college, and Philadelphia. That's where I got interviews because I went to college in Philadelphia. Um, and I ended up, thank God, I like got into NYU, which was fantastic. And I applied both. I remember Mount Sinai still has this program too. I applied to both schools to their 5-year. Mount Sinai calls it the Portal program, and NYU calls it the MD MSCI program. It's a dual degree 5-year program where you get a 2-year master's within the basically 1 year or year and a half. They make it work for the medical students. That you can get a scholarship for. So back then I actually had my master's degree fully covered. School wasn't free back then when I went to medical school. So my master's degree extra year was covered by a scholarship. And it was a fantastic experience. I knew it, but at the end of the day, I was choosing between those two schools because they both had this translational research degree that I wanted to get more experience. And through medical school, definitely, and studying brain tumor biology was what really solidified my interest in neurosurgery. Neurosurgeons are really the ones that primarily manage brain tumors. I'm sure you've been hearing about this from Randy D'Amico and all of the other faculty that are fantastic at Lennox. You're the first person that the patient meets, and you kind of are supposed to help coordinate their care from there. And there just aren't enough neuro-oncologists out there to treat all these patients. And it ends up being on the brain tumor surgeon to know everything about subsequent care for the patients and coordinate their care, which can be very hard and very challenging, but also very rewarding. So I stayed very interested in brain tumors. Like Justin, I wouldn't say I'm interested in fast pace, but I would say I'm interested in high intensity surgery. So in my early experience in our neurosurgical residency, where we do a lot of complex cases, which was, aside from my senior resident, Justin Turpin, being so awesome, the other thing that attracted me to our program was just the high acuity and high intensity of the cases that were done. And I managed to get myself involved in a lot of those very early on. So I also developed an interest in skull-base surgery, which is this complex surgery of the cranial base involving the cranial nerves and the vasculature, which takes a lot of time to master well. And I've accepted that. It's definitely something I had to like think about. And I'm like, do I really want to be doing, 12 to 14-hour cases on a regular basis with patients that don't necessarily do well? But I think there's a really good crossover between the skills required for skull-base surgery and the skills required for brain tumor surgery. They go hand in hand. And it's just a little bit of extra training afterwards, which I don't think at this point most neurosurgeons are scared of. They already signed up for the long haul. So, that's definitely how I found at least skull-base surgery, was just seeing the cases and having really good mentors. You're going to hear that over and over again as a theme in medicine, is people influence you. And you want to be with people that want to train you. That's how you succeed. And finding those people can be difficult. Sometimes you just get really lucky. I found Northwell because my old chief resident, Kevin Kwan, found me when I was doing research during my master's degree at NYU, and I started writing papers with him. He introduced me to our program director, Dr. Schulder. I already knew Dr. Bookvar and Dr. Langer. And then I met Justin Turpin, who was so cool. And I was like, of course I want to work with this guy this whole time. 7 years is a long time. So you have to like the people you work with in theory. So that's how I found the program. Changed my life. I would probably not be becoming a skull-base surgeon if it wasn't for this program. And neurosurgeons, you'll see, sort of define themselves by what they do. more so than ever in recent years. I think people have been discussing this at like the attending meetings across the country and these secret society meetings where they talk about the trends in neurosurgery. The idea of a general neurosurgeon is fading, and the idea of subspecialization early in residency is it's really up and coming and becoming a national phenomenon. So just because the training is hard to get really good at what you do, the markets become very competitive because of the internet, and people can find attendings that can do whatever specialty anywhere easily. And there's reviews on all these people and everything everywhere. So the market's difficult. And because, you know, training is different today than it was back then. There's a lot more transparency. Like patients know that at a teaching hospital, there are residents that don't know what they're doing. And malpractice is a real issue. Malpractice lawsuits are a real issue in this medical climate. So residents don't get to do as much as they used to do in the operating room. So the training does just effectively take longer because to get really good, because you're not getting that practice that you probably would have gotten 30, 40 years ago when nobody really knew what happened in the operating room. So, you know, we've all sort of signed up for this and understood it. Something that's nice about, you know, all the different specialties. I don't know, Hannah, have they discussed kind of the different subspecialties in neurosurgery? Because I feel like we're talking a lot about it.
We've had like a neuro-oncology virtual OR and a spine virtual OR, but we
Okay.
haven't really talked about cerebrovascular, neuroendovascular neurosurgery yet.
Sure. So yeah, I mean, there's people have their own ways of dividing up neurosurgery. But there are some basic ones. So there's, you know, cranial and spine. Within spine, for example, there are people that call themselves like big deformity surgeons that do a lot of scoliosis, and you'll see in like especially pediatric scoliosis, you'll see that a lot of those surgeons actually tend to be orthopedic surgeons. It's more ingrained in their fellowship training. Versus for us, we do a lot of like I wouldn't say normal, common deformity and like back pain related procedures on a more daily basis. But most of neurosurgery is spine. Most of our training is spine. People used to say 80% of the cases we do are spine. I don't think that's accurate. It's probably like 65 to 70% of the cases we do are spine cases. But still, it's definitely the majority of our training that we get. Then, so aside from big deformity, there's regular degen, which is kind of what I was talking about, degenerative spine, smaller fusions, kind of the bread and butter of neurosurgery. And that doesn't necessarily require extra fellowship training, although a lot of people will do that because now there's like minimally invasive spine and those kinds of techniques that can be used for this kind of regular, most common degenerative spine. Degenerative spine is like the heart disease of America. It's the most common neurosurgical pathology. And then there's, of course, spine tumors. A lot of people have subspecialization in spine tumors. So there are fellowships that are really focused on tumor surgery in spine. So that's another sort of pseudo subspecialization. But overall, there are just a few subspecializations in spine. Then in cranial surgery, there's cerebrovascular, which is a specialty in itself, but cerebrovascular can be divided into open cerebrovascular surgery and endovascular surgery. And endovascular surgery, which is what Justin is specializing in too, he basically, it's a 2-year fellowship, but you can get to do endovascular neurosurgery or cerebrovascular procedures via being a neurology resident. But honestly, if you do neurocritical care as a fellowship and then do a stroke fellowship, or you can do it through radiology, and you can do interventional radiology, or you can do it through neurosurgery. So there's a lot of ways to get to be a cerebrovascular surgeon, although the literature does show that neurosurgeons who are trained as endovascular surgeons have better outcomes for whatever that's worth. But there's a lot of different ways to get there that don't necessarily take as long as doing a neurosurgery residency and then doing endovascular. However, as Justin will explain to you, if he has time, maybe you can step in, Justin, if you're there. Being dual trained in both open and endovascular neurosurgery is a huge advantage in terms of understanding the pathologies and, of course, being able to treat any possible complication of whatever procedure you decide to do for the patient. And these attendings, they treat aneurysms, arteriovascular malformations. I don't know, Justin, you can talk more about this than I can.
Yeah. So let's say you have an aneurysm, which is a ballooning outpouching off of an artery, and you need it treated. You can treat it with coils, which are these small metal wires that we put in from within in the inside of the artery. So it's a small puncture in the groin or the wrist. We go into the blood vessels, go into the aneurysm, and fill it with small metal wires. Or you can do open surgery, which is you make an opening in the skull, remove bone, um, go between the lobes of the brain, and then put a titanium clip around the aneurysm from the outside so it doesn't rupture again. And which one you choose is very dependent on patient preference, location of the aneurysm, and the risk profile for each. So if you go to a surgeon that only does open surgery, then the only thing you can offer is open surgery, and the patient is gonna, wonder, okay, well, what about the other option? Is that a better option? But that person can't speak to which option is best. They're just going to say, well, I do this and I think it's best. And then you can go to an endovascular surgeon who might say the same thing about what they do, or maybe they're honest and they're like, you know what, this is a better case for surgery. But if you can do both, it's nice because you basically can say, well, I do both, and in this specific case, you're probably better off having it treated this way. And it's definitely an advantage, and you understand the intricacies of both. But it does significantly add time to your training to be able to do that. So you have to really like surgery, of course, to want to do that. Which is why I went into it. I went into it because I liked surgery, but then I fell in love with endovascular surgery, and that's kind of how I got here. But it's definitely an advantage.
Yeah, that's helpful. No one explains these things better than Justin. So, then of course there's brain tumor surgery. So a lot of brain tumor surgeons will sort of market themselves as glioma and metastasis surgeons. So we call them sort of convexity tumor surgeons. And then of course there's skull-based tumor surgeons or skull-based surgeons that deal with intricate pathology of the skull base, and they tend to have different like cranial approaches for both cases. And they care about different things when they're operating. But if you are able to do both, that's also, I think, an advantage. We'll see how it goes. So that's those. And then, of course, there's functional neurosurgeons, and then there's epilepsy neurosurgeons. There are fellowships that incorporate both, but they tend to think of themselves a little bit separate because they're essentially a separate skill set. If you still need to open epilepsy surgery, it can be pretty complex. And that's usually not what deep brain stimulation surgeons, when they're implanting devices for Parkinson's disease, that's not really what they're interested in doing. Those surgeries tend to be much simpler, but the science behind it is much, much more complicated. And those are surgeons that tend to have like interest in doing neuromodulation research because they have perfect subjects, their patients, because a lot of this, it's not necessarily experimental. Like we know what we're doing with the patients, but looking at other outcomes after implanting some of these devices for Parkinson's disease and seeing if there's other effects of the devices is something that's really important, because we can see if we can implant these relatively safely implantable devices for other pathologies, including psychiatric pathologies, which is a big new craze in neurosurgery. So we'll see how that goes. What am I forgetting? That's most of the specialties. I don't think I'm forgetting anything major. But yeah, if people have questions, I know we have a lot of time. Happy to answer any questions about residency. Day in the life of a resident is pretty simple. Come in early morning.
Let's just open it up.
Yeah.
See what people think or have
what do people
questions.
think? Have
Otherwise, we'll just
questions.
ramble for hours.
Yeah, exactly. I could ramble forever, so it's not a good idea to let me keep going.
I'm in the MRI suite.
That's
So
so cool.
Christy and I are monitoring the chat. So if you want, I can just fire questions at you as they come in.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Also, really quick, I do love that Justin is like in like you can see
Middle.
like this is what neurosurgery is. So again, thank you, Justin, for joining us.
So the first question, that's so cool, that we have for you guys, with so many different resources describing the rigorous hours of neurosurgery residency, how accurate are these claims? How many hours do you spend per week in each year of residency? Are you able to find a work-life balance?
I think so. Every residency in neurosurgery is a little bit different. I think a lot of the residencies have personalities. You have to sort of gauge that before you decide which residency you're going to join. The vast majority of residencies that I was interested in, that I considered, residency is what you make it. You put, you get out what you put in. And you can obviously control your time to whatever, you think you need. There's a minimum that will need to be put in. That's usually more difficult in the first 2 years of residency. To be honest, that's true of a lot of residencies. Internships are hard no matter where you are, because you're slow at everything. It's not that they actually demand more hours. It's just that you don't know enough to be fast enough. And that's true in any medical specialty, especially internal medicine or general surgery, where you're running around, you don't even know who to ask for the thing that you're looking for. And that adds so much time that you end up leaving so late in the day every day at the beginning, but that gets easier. I want to say like the time commitment gets better, but that's not really necessarily true. For example, as you become more senior, for me and Justin, especially, we're interested in doing a lot of big cases. So we end up staying, no one leaves when the workday ends. You leave when your case is over. So if we're doing a case that doesn't end till 1 o'clock in the morning, then we're there until 1 o'clock in the morning and have to be back by 5:30 to round. Right. So it just depends on the day, right? Every day is going to be different. And obviously the residents, we all try to help each other out at our program. Our program is really nice. So I'm sure there are other programs that are nice too, but we all like look to see who's operating late. And if like if one resident who's like been operating late every night is like, I can't do that room the next day because I know that case is also going to be late and I'm exhausted. Like people know, like we're pretty good at helping each other out to make sure that doesn't really happen. I would say as a junior resident, which is like the first half of residency, years 1 through 4, most of your weekends you will be in the hospital. But again, I don't want to say that that's not true of other residencies. I'm sure some residencies that's also true. Like 3 out of 4 weekends you're in the hospital. I think this is the first year where I'm only working 2 weekends a month and I'm PGY5. So I don't know if that helps people understand it better. But again, those weekend shifts, I kind of find them fun because they're like, I'm on home call. So home call just means I'm like on my phone all day, sitting here at my desk, like waiting for them to call me and I have to just go around in the morning. Or if there's a case that gets posted, I have to go in for it. Or I'm in the hospital for one of the 2 days of the weekend, just helping to see patients, taking care of patients on the floor. So it's a little more chill. And then you get to hang out with your co-residents. I will say, like, any residency, especially neurosurgery, one thing is, especially for neurosurgery, the residency does like take up most of your life, but a lot of people will spend all their time trying to figure out like how to maximize that free time that they have. So that's what their life becomes about, is maximizing their free time.
Yeah, I can add a little bit to
go
that,
ahead.
Danielle. So I would say as an intern and a junior, you're extremely busy. You're probably going to the hospital 5:30, 5 a.m.-ish, like around 5 to 5:30. And some days you're there into the evening, like 8 p.m. or even later sometimes. And so the first 2 years are really tough, but you learn a lot and you go from medical student to like functional resident. So there's a lot of work that needs to be done to get you there. But then as a more senior resident, there's days that you're done at 3 o'clock. And there's days that you're doing a case that's like 12 hours.
Right.
And that case will go until 8 or 9 p.m. So it varies. And then sometimes you get called in at night when you're on call. But it definitely gets better with every year, significantly better. And despite having an intense schedule, I've always maintained somewhat of a work-life balance because it's such a priority for me. I need to have a release or need to do something other than work in neurosurgery for me to remain like sane and happy. So I usually will, find time on the 1 or 2 days off I get a week. I'll go outside, go to a concert, I'll exercise, play soccer, run, bike. And I'm like, even when I was a junior, I'd always find time. So as
Yeah.
long as you prioritize it and you have good time management, you can definitely find a way to have a work-life balance. And it gets better, significantly better with every year.
It gets better overall too, just because like the choice you're making the choice of like what case you're going to do and whether you're going to be there late. You know, when you're a junior resident, you know, there's a certain amount of work that you just have to finish before you leave the hospital, and that's not up to you. But when you're a more senior resident starting by PGY3, it's like, you know, you're choosing your cases. And so you're kind of like customizing your day to whatever is needed. Of course, like the more senior you get, the more choice you get. And then, you know, yes, maybe you are the person that's going to decide to do the 12 to 14-hour case every single day. So yeah, you have less time than maybe some of the junior residents, but that was by choice. So, you know, that there's that aspect of it too. And even like Justin was saying, when I was a junior resident, I mean, I was really working very hard to coordinate with my boyfriend. I knew I had one weekend off a month, and then like there were some Fridays when it would make sense to potentially go out for dinner. So like twice a month, I would like way in advance make restaurant reservations so that we always had like dinner date night. And I couldn't, if I like messed up dinner date night, like that was a really big deal. So I like planned it way in advance, and I could still do that as a junior. I actually did that more back then because my schedule was tighter. Then now I don't have to like think about it as much. But that was something that was very important to me, so I made sure it happened. And you can do that.
Great, thank you guys. We're getting a bunch of questions asking about the process of applying for residency. What was it? How was it? And also what you guys did during medical school to become a competitive applicant for a neurosurgery residency.
Justin, you can go first.
Yeah, so the last question was the one that I remember. So in terms of what I did during medical school, the advice I give to students these days is I want you to like think in the future where you're sitting in front of someone who's interviewing you, and that person asks you for your story of like why you're interested in neurosurgery, or like basically the question is tell me about yourself, and then you have to start talking about yourself. And you want to think about like what is it you're going to say, and is what you're going to say, does it make sense? Are you passionate about it? Are you excited to talk about it? Is it a coherent timeline? Meaning like, can you actually tell a story of what brought you to neurosurgery? Because sometimes I find like people will just do as much stuff as they can to kind of fill their resume with random things that don't connect, and you don't really have an interest in them. So then when you talk about it, it's not that interesting, and you can tell like, oh, that person's not passionate about these things. They just did a bunch of stuff. But then again, like if you have someone that only did a couple things, but they were really into it, that's much more interesting to me. And I think most people would agree. Like for me, I did soccer. I was the captain of the soccer team, and I did this design program at Jefferson, which is where I went, where we basically worked with different projects like an architecture company to design a better patient room, or emergency department to create a better patient flow, stuff like that. And I think those were like the main things I did, but I was really, really involved in them. And I did research with the neurosurgery department. So I didn't do a lot of things, but I was very like in depth with those things. And so I think it's always good to not just do things for the sake of doing them, but do things that you're actually really passionate about. And that could be like anything. If you're really passionate about painting, do painting, and do, put a lot into that. Whatever it is, because I think the key thing that I look for is whether you can have like intense passion for something. And that definitely comes across in interviews.
Yeah, I totally agree with Justin. I mean, the thing that gets me the most is when I see these resumes of students with like 500 publications, and I like go and interview them and I ask them about like a few of them, and they can't describe them very well. And that really gets to me because I'm like, I'm like very obsessed with the way I do my own research. I want to make sure everything is done a certain way and I know what's going on, even though it's not my own project, etc. And it just shows to me that they did not get engaged in the material and didn't go out of their way to, read about the topic that they were supposedly writing about. Because if you're going to write a paper, I expect you to be an expert on the topic and have spent time reading all the literature and synthesizing all of the analysis in your discussion. So if you can't describe it well, or if I know more about it than you, which is rare, I only know about a few things in the extreme detail, but if I know more about it than you, then there's a problem. For any medical student writing a paper, but especially if it's a spine paper or something that's not in my field. So that always gets me. So it's exactly sort of what Justin was saying, padding resumes to look like you're doing a lot is not necessarily the right answer. And it's okay. I think, a lot of students struggle because I know that they struggle to find a mentor at the beginning. So they do research in different fields of neurosurgery. So they'll like write a paper for a supravascular tending, and then they'll write a spine paper. And that's okay because we, I understand, I know Justin does too. Like we understand that, the opportunity is not always there right away to find the thing or the thing that you're extremely passionate about, you might not have found yet. And you're just looking through and trying to learn about things. But at least if you can demonstrate that you did a couple papers in this topic and worked for a couple people in this field, that you're exploring it and you have a good story for that and you understood what you did, then that's great. That's better than having, one person have 20 papers sort of about brain tumor surgery that they don't understand. So that's also something I know students are frequently concerned with. In terms of applying for residency, I mean, I could go on about this forever. In the climate of no step 1 scores and people looking to like shorten the list of research that people are allowed to put on their CVs and things like that, it's becoming harder and harder for programs to sort of use screening tools to screen out a large group of applicants before they do interviews. And I think a lot of program directors and interviewers are frustrated by this, especially since neurosurgery is such a apprenticeship type residency where it's a small residency. Some programs only have one resident a year and you have to train that person for 7 years, the same attending. The residency is a legacy, right? Like I am always going to be known as Dr. Schulder's resident. So is Justin. Justin's going to be Dr. Wu's resident forever, right? Like he's trained by Dr. Wu for vascular. So that's, you live and die by your trainees because they represent you in the field of neurosurgery. That's very important to the people looking at applications. So what you're starting to see in this field is that a lot of residents are coming from their own home programs. They're coming from their own schools, or they're coming from the pool of applicants that the attendings know well. So they've reached out early and they've written papers for those attendings, gotten involved in research at those places, or they did rotations at those places. Like both Justin and I rotated at North Shore before we matched, and people just really liked working with us. That's why we matched, because they knew us. We were a known entity. So I think that that's something in this modern climate of applications is really important to think about. I'm already thinking about next year's residents, and I already have like 2 out of 3 on my list. I already know who I want because I've known them for at least 2 years. So just
Yeah,
to put that into
I would second
perspective.
that. Mentorship is really important. Just like in most things, unfortunately, it's a lot goes down to like who can make a phone call and what kind of letter you have. So it's just like Danielle says, it's hard to differentiate people on paper these days. And so if someone vouches for you, it can really go a long way.
Thank you guys so much. The next question we have for you: how do the surgeries a resident is allowed to perform and their level of responsibility progress over the years?
Chief Resident, you want to take that one?
Yes, sure. So it's different for every residency program, but overall it's graduated responsibility and apprenticeship here, meaning that each attending kind of knows you in a different way. and you develop a relationship with each attending. And each attending will have basically a level of graduated responsibility that they want to grant to you depending on how much they know you, what they know you're capable of, what your weaknesses are. So as an intern, you start out essentially watching because that's all they can know you can do, right? Maybe you get to do something very simple and easy that you can't really mess up. If you do that well, then that attending that you did that with will let you do something a little bit more next time. And you kind of have to build that with every attending. So by the time you're a chief, you really, you've done 6 years of cases with people. And so everyone knows you and your weaknesses in and out, and they're able to really trust you. And some residents will get to the point where the attending will basically be like, them operating is basically like me operating at this point. And they can almost just like they just have so much trust in that resident at that point. But obviously that takes years and years and years to build. So it's basically like graduated responsibility, and by certain years you're kind of expected to meet certain like what's not landmarks, I guess it's
Like milestones.
Milestones, yeah. So, and if you're not meeting those milestones, then all of us would figure out why, and then we can work on it together. But in general, it seems to work for everyone. Everyone kind of reaches those milestones, and the system kind of works itself out.
It does. I agree with Justin. I think, there are some attendings that I tend to show up a lot to their cases. So by the time I was PGY 4, I was already being trusted to do critical portions of the case in certain attendings rooms. But then if I went to like one of the deformity spine rooms, I think they would hold my hand while putting in a screw because they haven't seen me operate for years. So, it's a little bit self-inflicted or self-rewarded in a way, how you spend your time. But of course, it's important to become a very well-rounded neurosurgeon, and all the faculty watch very closely to make sure that that happens. So yeah, the system does work. And of course, taking call at different points in our training, I think especially in our program, there's some responsibility that, especially PGY 3, that you start to get where you may or may not be expected to operate on an emergency. And you kind of have to have some idea of how to at least start those cases, which can be really scary at the beginning. But then, of course, the more you're put in that situation, the faster you learn. So, the way our system works, it works really well. So I'm very happy with it, at least at our program. Again, this is something that probably varies a lot by institution. But the idea, of course, is always graduated autonomy. And a lot of it too, that I'll just add to what Justin was saying, the residents, we teach each other. So sometimes, you'll want, as a junior resident, you want to go to a case where there's a more senior resident there because that attending trusts that senior resident, whoever it is, and that attending will probably let that senior resident direct the case, and that senior resident wants to prove that they can teach too. So then you actually get to do more, even though you're 2 residents in the room, because that senior resident will let you do things and watch you very closely, because we all want to teach each other. We like to do that. It's part of our culture. And I think that's pretty universal in neurosurgery. I think that's what's different. I think that's a different thing about neurosurgery than a lot of other surgical subspecialties, is that kind of cross-teaching culture. I don't really see it in general surgery.
Great, thank you so much. We have a few questions asking about what research opportunities are like during residency, and asking if there's a built-in research year in most programs.
Sure. I can take that one since technically I'm still on my research year. It's my apartment. So research, most programs across the US build in at least 6 months of elective time, and residents can typically choose what they do at that time. Although I will say, again, this is something that varies program to program and has been changing a lot in the past 5 years. And by the time some of you guys might apply to residency, might have changed even more. There was a time, for example, when I applied to residency, when our program had 2 full years of elective time, and so did programs like Cornell. And now both of our programs are basically down to a year and a half, essentially, functionally. Cornell is definitely down to a year and a half, and we're functionally down to a year and a half. We can't really support having residents off service for 2 years anymore, just because of the number of hospitals we have to cover. So, however, I will say our program, like, we can do sort of whatever we want with that elective time. Other places, sometimes they're forced to work not just in a lab, but sometimes in a specific lab. I spent a year in the lab, and now I'm finishing up some clinical research and doing a lot of teaching for the next couple months before I go back to residency. But yeah, that elective time you can really do whatever you want with, and people like Justin will do part of the endovascular fellowship, because the endovascular fellowship is 2 years, but one of the years can be done during the elective period. So that is something that is definitely an option. The other fellowship that you can do during the elective period is critical care, if you're interested in getting critical care certified as well.
Great, thank you. Someone asked, is there a maximum number of hours a neurosurgery resident is permitted to work per week? And then asked if it's limited to 80.
It is limited to 80. According to the ACGME, it is limited to 80. That's correct. And then you have to have a day off every 7 days. There's a way it's calculated that Justin made the schedule last year, so he made it legal for everybody, but I don't have to think about that until next year. I'll have to make the schedule. But yeah, there's some very tight restrictions. And then vacations, we get, according to the ACGME rules, we get 4 weeks a year of vacation. At our program, it's discouraged to take the 2 weeks in a row. I know that's not true at other programs, unless you're like getting married or something like that, just because it makes it hard for coverage. But usually we get 2 weeks, like a semester, so 4 weeks a month of vacation.
Great, thank you. Maybe one last question and then we'll wrap up. Someone asked what you would say your favorite part of neurosurgery residency is.
My favorite part is operating. I'm a neurosurgery resident. I'm a neurosurgeon. I love operating. I want to be in the OR every day. I'm never as happy as I am when I'm in the operating room. I would live and die in the operating room if I could, but unfortunately I have dogs and boyfriends and friends and family that I have to see. But stop laughing at me, Justin. But I would live and breathe in the operating room. I just love being there. I love getting better. I love the cases, and I love the patients, and I love seeing them wake up better, hopefully, than when they went to sleep, or not, and then we have to do something about it. But I love the acuity of always having to think about what I'm doing and practicing to access parts of the brain in eloquent regions or in critical areas where you'd think you'd really hurt the patient, and then they wake up and they're fine. And you took out their tumor, and now they don't have to worry about it for the rest of their life. So that's very rewarding, and I would do that and live and breathe in the operating room every minute if I could. Being home is very frustrating for me, as Justin knows.
Oh wow, I'm not at that extreme. I do like being home more than Danielle probably, but no, I can definitely mirror some of that feeling. I think for me, my favorite part is similar in that I think we're learning to do something with our hands, like almost like a trade, like a blacksmith or like an engineer, someone that works with their hands. And I think that the best part of residency is over the years you're able to see how much you're improving with that skill that you're able to do with your own hands. And then the feeling of the immense like reward you get when you can save someone's life and it's like you that actually did it. It's an amazing feeling, and it's great that we get to learn those skills. It's an honor, a privilege, and it just makes you feel like you're doing something so meaningful. I think that's the best part. And as you get more senior, it's more you doing it. And it's great that you have that capability, that you kind of learn those skills over the years. So that feeling of reward, I think, is my favorite part. Maybe second is just working with awesome people.
Yeah, I think neurosurgeons are a really weird, unique group of people that just, it's like, I don't know, it's a weird subgroup of nerds that are like cool nerds that aren't that cool, but we think we're cool. And we all like have similar personalities somehow, even though it doesn't seem like it on the surface. So it's just a fun group of people to work with. Yeah.
Great. Thank you both so much for taking the time to talk to our brain turns this morning. Brain turns, if we could say thank you to our wonderful speakers this morning.
All
Yeah,
right.
thanks for
Good luck,
having us.
everybody.
If people have questions, they can email me. You can send out my email if you want.
Thank you so much.
Yes, I agree.
Thanks.
All right. Bye, everybody.
Thanks, Justin. Thanks, Danielle.